welcome to the 2020 Virtual Gaithersburg Book Festival, or as those in the know call it, the VGBF. I'm Phil Kaminsky, your VGBF host, and I am just over the moon to have you with us this morning. Myself and my remarkably wonderful City of Gaithersburg friends who work tirelessly on this fine program truly wish that you could have been here in person with us, but we're super excited that you have chosen to spend your time with us here today virtually. That being said, before we dive headfirst into this morning's swimming pool of goodness, I'd respectfully ask that you do three things for us. First, like this video. Second, please comment below to let us know where you're watching us from. And third, hit the subscribe bell so that you will receive notifications about all of our upcoming presentations. Undoubtedly, you will have questions during this presentation, and that is just terrific. Do me a favor and please write them in the chat section. Most, if not all of your questions will be sent to the author and he will answer them following his presentation. Of course, we encourage you to support today's featured author by purchasing his books through our independent bookseller and festival partner, the one and only Politics and Prose. And lastly, a ginormous thank you goes out to VGBF's featured sponsors, the David and Mikhail Blair Family Foundation, Downtown Crown RPAI, and Montgomery College. Oakley dokley neighbors, let's get started. Kids, I'm so glad that you're here this morning. We are going to meet the one and only Adam Gidwitz. Adam is the best-selling author of A Tale Dark and Grim, In a Glass Grimly, and The Grim Conclusion, as well as the Newbery-honored novel, The Inquisitor's Tale, and the brand new series, The Unicorn Rescue Society. Today, Adam will tell us about book number 5 in the Unicorn Rescue Society series, the Madre de Aguas of Cuba. Welcome, Adam. How are you? We're so excited to meet you and hear all about this totally rad new book.
Thank you so much, Phil. That was such a lovely introduction. I am very happy to be here with you guys. I'm very happy to be at the Gaithersburg Book Festival, even if it is virtual. I wish I could actually be in Gaithersburg with all of you. I grew up in Baltimore, so I'm also a Marylander. And yeah, I wish I could be back home with you guys. But we're going to have some fun here today, I promise. Okay, I'm not going to promise, but we might have fun here today, especially if you bring positive energy and you bring some questions maybe. And I'm going to try to tell you some stories, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about my books. So give me a moment while I share my screen and show you some of the covers of my books, because visual, aids can be useful. So I'm sharing my screen. Hopefully you can see them. These are my books. I will tell you a little bit about them right now. So I'm the author of, let's see if I can go here, A Tale Dark and Grim, In a Glass Grimly, and The Grim Conclusion. What you see in front of you now are the paperback covers, which are more common. Most people see those. These books are based on Grimm's fairy tales. Now, a lot of people think of fairy tales as cute and sweet stories for little kids. The real Grimm fairy tales were not like that. They were quite dark. They were often kind of scary and freaky. They could be bloody. If you like scary and bloody stories, you're weird. But you're also weird like me, and you would probably like these books. Also, if you like scary, dark stories, I have a podcast which you can listen to called Grim, Grimmer, Grimmest. It's on Pinna. The first season is free on iTunes, so check that out if you like kind of funny, creepy stories. And if you like funny, creepy stories, you should definitely get these books. You should get them, if you can, from Politics and Prose, one of the best bookstores in the whole world. It really is. I'm also the author of Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, so you want to be a Jedi. In this book, I retell one of the original Star Wars movies, but I tell it in a different style. In this book, you are Luke Skywalker. You are trained by Yoda. You fight Darth Vader at the end. And in between each chapter, there are Jedi training lessons where I teach you important Jedi skills, like how to meditate, and how to meditate while standing on one foot, and how to meditate while standing on foot while people throw dirty laundry at you, like that. So it's a perfect book for being in quarantine because it gives you an opportunity to throw dirty laundry at your parents or your siblings. I'm also the author of The Inquisitor's Tale, or The Three Magical Children and Their Holy Dog. This book is the book that was awarded the Newbery Honor in 2016. It takes place in the Middle Ages, the time of knights and kings and castles. And it's about 3 kids, a girl who has visions of the future, a boy with incredible strength, another boy who can heal people's wounds, and a holy dog. And they have crazy adventures. And these adventures are based on medieval folklore and legends, as well as real medieval history. So they get trapped in quicksand outside of a real monastery that is really surrounded by quicksand called Mont Saint-Michel. They travel through a haunted forest, which is based on like an 1100, a 1200-year-old story, and they get attacked by these fiends. They have to fight a dragon that kills people by farting on them. That's right. There is an 800-year-old story from the Middle Ages about a dragon with deadly farts, and that is in this book. So if you like medieval adventures or epic adventures or just deadly farting dragons, you should read The Inquisitor's Tale. But let me tell you a little bit about myself. So this is me, as you can see, right? My hair was slightly better then, but otherwise, you know, that's me now. But this is me when I was in the 7th grade. Yeah, take a good look at it. I'm going to take it off the screen in a minute because it's super embarrassing. I promise you that haircut was cool when I was in the 7th grade. It was only cool for that 1 year, but it was. Those of you who are old enough to remember, you remember that haircut. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute so you can see my face now, and I can tell you a little bit more about how I went from that to being a writer. So when I was in the 7th grade, I had an author come to my school and talk to me, kind of like I'm here with you, but we were in the school auditorium. And I don't remember the author's name. I don't remember any books that the author wrote. I don't remember anything the author said, in fact. Nothing, except for one thing. Somebody asked the author, "How do you know if you're a writer?" My ears perked up. I was curious. I didn't think I would be a writer when I grew up. I was pretty sure I'd be a professional basketball player. Did not work out. I don't know why. But the author thought about it for a minute, and she says, "How do you know if you're a writer?" And then she says, "Writers write." And I was like, duh, obviously. But then I thought about it. Maybe she got a point. Writers write. Well, do I write? When I was in 7th grade, that's what I was thinking. I wrote for school when I was supposed to write for school, and homework when I remembered to do my homework. But did I write on my own for fun? Because I figured that's what she meant. The answer was no, I never did. And so I decided on that day in 7th grade that I was not a writer and that I never would be. And I was sure of it. And every time I got an idea for a story after that, because everybody gets an idea sometimes, right? You're like sitting by the window, looking out the window, and you see an old lady walking by, and you think, oh, wouldn't it be cool if that old lady turned humongous and attacked a city or something? Answer is yes, that would be awesome. Anyway, I'd always write like a paragraph or two, but I'd always quit and be like, psh, who am I kidding? I know I'm not a writer. But I'm here today, and I've written all those books that I just showed you pictures of, and some more that I'll show you the pictures of in a moment. How did that happen? I think this is how. When I was a kid, I didn't do a lot of writing, but what I did was I had these toys. They were called G.I. Joes. I don't know if you've heard of G.I. Joes, but if you haven't, they're these little action figures with like masks and weapons. If you know what Barbies are, they're kind of like mini Barbies with weapons, okay? So I used to play with these G.I. Joes all the time when I was a kid, and it would always go the same way. I would take one in each hand, and they would, usually like one would say something mean, the other one would like beat them up, and I would do that. The other thing I used to like to do as a kid was I had a basketball hoop on my driveway. It was a cool basketball hoop. I was very lucky because it could go up to 10 feet or down to 6 feet. And had I really wanted to get good at basketball, I should have left it up at 10 feet and just practiced my jump shot all day long, practice my form. But I thought it was much more fun to pretend to be good at basketball. So I put it down to 6 feet, and I would dunk and shoot 3-pointers and take fadeaways. And the whole time I would talk to myself and tell myself these stories about me making the NBA, what team I would be on, winning the championship. Hours a day I used to do this. But eventually things changed. I went away to college, and I became a teacher. And as a teacher, I would tell my students a lot of stories. And one year I was teaching them about ancient Egypt, mummies and pyramids and stuff. And I wanted to read them a book that took place in ancient Egypt. But I couldn't find a good book that took place in ancient Egypt that was a good read aloud for 2nd graders. So I decided, well, write a story down and read it to them. Now, remember, in 7th grade, I decided I would never be a writer. But I thought, well, I tell the kids stories, I could write one down. So I wrote a chapter of a story, and I brought it in and read it to these students. And after I finished it, they said, oh, that's kind of good. What happens next? And I said, I don't know. So went home, wrote down another chapter of the story, read to them the next day. They said, what happens next? I said, I don't know. So I went home, wrote another chapter of the story. They said, what happens next? I said, I don't know. And every day I'd have to go home and write another chapter of this story. Because if you've ever read a story to second graders, you know that if you start it and you don't finish it, they will kill you. Because second graders are terrifying little creatures. If there are any second graders out there, I apologize to your teachers. No, just kidding. Anyway, so I had to write this book. By the end of the school year, it was 100 pages long. I was very proud of it. So I decided that I would quit my job as a teacher and see if I could get this book published. And my wife was not happy because that was half our income was gone. But I decided to do it anyway. I quit my job and I started to revise this book. I took it from 100 pages to 200 pages to 300 pages to 400 pages long. It took me a whole year. And I sent it to an agent who is somebody who helps you get your books published. And she read it. And she called me up and she invited me to her office at the top story of a skyscraper in New York City. So I get there, I take the elevator all the way up to the top floor. I get out there, these huge windows. I sit down in this big comfy chair. She sits across from me. And I'm like, okay, here we go. This is it. This is the moment. And I say, so what'd you think? And she goes, it's not very good. And I was like, what? I've been working on the book for 2 years now. It's 400 pages long. I quit my job. All you can tell me is it's not very good. She says, well, if you wanted to start on a new book, I wouldn't blame you, which is adult code for throw it in the trash can. I was devastated. But I've never been very good at doing what people tell me to do. So she told me to quit, which meant I could not quit. So I started to revise the book. I took it from 400 pages down to 300 pages down to 250 pages long. And I was about to send it back to her when I got a phone call from the school that I used to teach at. I was substituting to make some extra money. And they asked me if I'd be willing to be a substitute librarian for a day. And I said yes, because librarian is one of the best jobs I can imagine. You could hang out with kids and share stories you like with kids. I was like, I want to do that. They said, great. You're going to be telling stories to second graders. I said, no problem. I do it all the time. They said, tell them any story you want. I said, great. So I went home and I was looking around my shelf for a good story to read to second graders. And I came across, wait, I'm going to stand up. Don't leave because I think I've got the book right over there. Don't move. This book. This is my copy of the real grim version of the fairy tales. So I looked at it and I thought, oh, fairy tales. Those are perfect for little kids. Now, I had never read these stories before. So I opened it up, and one of the stories in here is called Faithful Johannes, probably right here, Faithful Johannes. So I started reading Faithful Johannes, and it turns out in Faithful Johannes, 2 kids get their heads cut off. They get put back on again, so they're fine, I promise. But I read that and I was like, can I read this to second graders? Will I get fired? And then I thought, let's find out. So I brought the book in and I started reading to these kids, and very quickly they started to get very nervous. So I'd make a joke to calm them down, or I would warn them something really terrifying was about to happen. And I think I did a pretty good job, because by the end of the story I looked up and every kid had the same expression on his or her face. Every kid looked exactly like this, like, and I was like, oh boy. So I dismissed the children. Some of them are crying. I think one little boy peed his pants. But this little girl came up to me and she stuck her finger in my face and she said, that was good. And I said, what? And she said, you should make that into a book. And I thought, maybe I should. And so I did. I went home and I wrote that story up and I sent that to my agent instead of the ancient Egypt book that I'd been revising. And she called me up and she said, this is pretty good. And she became my agent, and that became the first chapter of my first book, A Tale Dark and Grim. Now, at some point in your life, you might be doing something that you love, and somebody might tell you that you stink, and that you're garbage, and that you should quit. And if they do, you have 2 choices. You can believe that person, or you can prove them wrong. I recommend the second one. So anyway, I was sitting at home, writing with this book, and I suddenly realized, telling a story and telling it out loud is what I always do. I tell the story out loud, just like I'm telling it to these second graders, and I'm writing it up. And I suddenly realized telling a story out loud and going like this is just about exactly the same thing as telling a story out loud and going like this with G.I. Joes. Or telling a story out loud and going like this on a 6-foot basketball hoop. And I suddenly realized I had been a writer my whole life. Every day of my life, I spent 2 or 3 hours a day writing stories. I never wrote any of them down. But it's the same thing that I do now, except now I get paid to do it. So if you ever find yourself doing things like playing or staring out the window, making up stories, that's being a writer. And you can write it down now, or you can write it down when you grow up, but it is the same thing. All right, well, that's how I became a writer. I now need to share my screen again because I do have to show you the covers of my new books. So first of all, just so we know, that's, please don't look at that. That's embarrassing. Okay, so this is the Unicorn Rescue Society. It is my new series. I would say it is for grades maybe 2 through 5. So these books are about 2 kids who travel around the world rescuing mythical creatures from danger. There's Elliot and there's Uchenna. They also have a mentor, a teacher, Professor Fauna, who's kind of a crazy man. And he has been looking for unicorns his whole life, but spoiler alert, he's never found one. So in the Unicorn Rescue Society, there are at this point no unicorns. They have found other crazy creatures though, and they are looking for a unicorn and they might find one. And in fact, there are clues about where the unicorns are going to be at the end of each book. But in the first book, they discover a Jersey devil, which is not a devil. It's just a little creature that they call a devil, like a Tasmanian devil. It's got red wings and a blue body. And they found it in New Jersey. The second book, they have to go to the Basque country and they discover a dragon. The Basque country is near Spain. A dragon with magical spit. The third book, they discover Sasquatch, also known as Bigfoot. The fourth book, they find chupacabras. You know what a chupacabra is? Like a bouncing hairless dog that sucks the blood out of animals. Don't worry, he's actually really cute. And in the fifth book, which just came out 2 weeks ago, the Madre de AGUAS of Cuba, where they have to go to Cuba and they discover a giant and terrifying sea serpent. And now I'm going to read you a very short passage of the Madre de AGUAS of Cuba so you get a sense of what happens in this book. So they are currently flying in a tiny little airplane that they have to Cuba. It is Uchenna and Elliot, the 2 main characters, the kids. Jersey, their little sidekick, because that blue Jersey devil becomes their sidekick. Professor Fauna, their crazy teacher, and their friend, Johannes, who is from Miami, but originally from Cuba. He's going to be their guide. So they're flying and they're looking for a place to land in Havana, the capital of Cuba. How about a nice airport, said Elliot. That would be a nice change. Professor Fauna pointed to a wide stretch of road next to the bay. Waves crashed up on the black rocks, spraying pedestrians who were walking beside a stone seawall. What about there? He said. Oh, you see, I have a mug that looks like Shakespeare just to, subliminal messaging. That's the roadway along the seawall, the Malecon, said Johannes. It's pretty busy, especially during the day. But Professor Fauna was already aiming the phoenix directly toward it. Professor, said Johannes, this isn't a good idea. Professor Fauna seemed not to be listening. Professor, Uchenna tried to get his attention. Professor, Elliot cried. Horns were honking and people were yelling. Professor Fauna's tongue was sticking out of his mouth. He was concentrating as hard as he could. The Malecon was approaching fast. Johannes covered his eyes. Uchenna covered her eyes. Jersey climbed on Elliot's face and covered his eyes for him. Professor Fauna started screaming. The wheels touched the roadway. I did it, Professor Fauna screamed. Así se hace, cried Johannes. Now slow down. But the phoenix was not slowing down. Mito, use the brakes! What brakes? Professor Fauna shouted. The phoenix hit the wall hard that ran between the roadway and the Havana Bay. And suddenly the phoenix was spinning like a wheel, wing over wing. Everyone was screaming. They hit the water hard. Chapter 7. Out, 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 Professor Fauna shouted. He pushed open the doors before they were submerged, and soon Uchenna, Elliot, Professor Fauna, and Johannes were swimming in the water of the Havana Bay. We're alive, Uchenna crowed. She looked around. Right? You're all alive? I'm alive, said Professor Fauna, treading water. Johannes, are you alive? Johannes was holding on to the wing of the phoenix. I'm alive. Elliot, are you alive? Elliot burst up through the surface, coughing and spitting. He's alive, Uchenna shouted. But where's Jersey? Just then Jersey popped out of the water too, in an eruption of red wings and tiny coughs. He flapped his way above the waves and then landed on Elliot's head. Hey, Jersey, come on. Treading water is hard enough. Ugh, Uchenna spat. Do not drink the water. I wouldn't, said Johannes, his head bobbing above the small waves. Havana's waste gets dumped in the bay. Look, there's a sewage drain. He nodded at a small pipe that was protruding from the Malecon. Dirty water was pouring out of it into the bay. Though Johannes tried to climb up on the phoenix's wing. When his back was to the drain, a small creature stuck its head out of the pipe. What is that? Uchenna exclaimed, kicking hard with her legs to keep her head above the oily, fishy water. Looks like some kind of lizard, said Elliot, or fish, or footless amphibian. I can't tell from here. His head sunk beneath the water, and when he came up, he was shouting, "Oh, the water's in my mouth! Oh, it's in my mouth! Get it out!" The little creature raised its head. It was blue-green, with a body like a snake's. It appeared to have ornate horns on its head, and even from a distance they could see its eyes, a shining midnight blue. Suddenly, it slid out of the sewage pipe and slipped into the water of the bay, and then it was gone beneath the waves. "What was that?" Uchenna said. Johannes, half up on the plane's wing, turned toward the sewage pipe again. "What was what?" Professor Fauna was swimming around like he was enjoying himself, but Uchenna and Elliot were treading water and looking at one another. "That thing was weird," said Uchenna. "Yeah," agreed Elliot. "That was definitely not any creature I'm familiar with. It looked like a snake crossed with a bull, crossed with a..." Just then they felt the water vibrate below them, which was a strange feeling because water doesn't normally vibrate. Uchenna looked down and could just make out through the murky water the strange creature. It seemed to be swimming up toward them, getting larger as it came, but not larger in the way that an object usually gets larger as it comes toward you. Larger at a much faster rate. Unnaturally fast. Like it was growing. Elliot, said Uchenna. "I see it, Uchenna," Elliot replied. "Swim for your lives!" They both started swimming toward the phoenix as fast as they could. There was a roar of water behind them. Everyone was screaming. And then they saw that. But if you want to find out what happens and whether they get eaten by the Madre de Aguas or what is going on, you're going to have to read the book. So, I would tell you just one more thing that you need to see pictures for. This book is co-written by Emma Otegi. So I try to team up with people from the culture that the Unicorn Rescue Society visits. So they go to Havana. So I teamed up with Emma Otegi, who is an incredible award-winning children's book author. She wrote these books that you see in front of you. And I highly recommend all of her books. And we wrote Madre de Aguas of Cuba together, which was amazingly fun. The book is illustrated. You saw those incredible illustrations. The book is illustrated by Hatem Ali. Hatem is an Egyptian guy, Muslim guy from Egypt who now lives in Canada, one of the best illustrators working today, and also just a lovely human being. I love Hatem, and he illustrated The Inquisitor's Tale as well as all of the Unicorn Rescue Society books. He makes all of my books that he illustrates so much better. Okay, that's pretty much what I wanted to tell you. And I've been talking for a long time, so I'm going to stop sharing the screen. And I'm going to invite Phil to come back and just see if, I don't know, did anybody have any questions?
Adam, 1 second here. I'm sorry, I'm just ordering 4,000 copies of The Inquisitor's Tale solely because of the farting dragon. So it's just delicious. I also want to let everyone know that I can verify that Adam's haircut in the 7th grade was cool. I had one.
Thank you, Phil.
And it might still be cool, you know.
I don't know.
We've got some questions for you. Absolutely. All right, so let's start off here. We got some here. All right, first question, here we go. How long does it typically take you to write a book, Adam?
That's a great question. And it really depends on the book. The Madre de Aguas of Cuba took us a while. It took us over a year to write that book. That's because the process went like this. I first approached Emma and said, "I love your writing. I'd love to write a book with you. Maybe it would take place in Cuba." And she would say, "Sure, of course. Said my family's from Cuba. I'd love to write about Cuba." And I said, "What kind of creature do you want to write about?" And then took about a month to decide on the Madre de Aguas. Then she wrote like I said, a proposal of what the book might be about. Then we wrote an outline together. Then we started writing it, and we would trade off chapters. She wrote 2 chapters. I wrote 2 chapters. She wrote 2 chapters. Then after it's written, we have to go back through it because, listen, sometimes you write something and you're like, "This is bad. I'm not a writer." The first draft that anybody writes is always bad. It doesn't matter if you're William Shakespeare. The first draft is not very good. Well, his first drafts were good. Forget him. Everybody else, the first drafts were terrible, including me. So we have to go back and we rewrite it. And we rewrite it again. And that whole process took about a year. And then that's for the Madre de Aguas of Cuba, which is actually not a very long book. We wrote it to be fast and short and fun. A book like The Inquisitor's Tale, which is an epic medieval adventure, which included a lot of research, that book took me 6 years to write.
Ooh.
Yeah.
All right. All right, we've got a Okay, this is a question from my son. This is a question from Tyler Kaminsky. How many books have you made and what were the genres? But it's a two-part question, looks like. What was your favorite book that you wrote and why?
Wow. Okay. So what was a favorite book, but also how many books I've written and what were the genres? Was that the first part?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So first part first, I have written now 10 books. The Unicorn Rescue Society, Madre, AGUAS is my 10th book. And the genres are all pretty much fantasy or fairy tale. I don't do like high fantasy with like wizards and elves and stuff as much as I love reading that stuff, but I don't tend to write it. I like doing kind of stories about kids who feel real, but where insane, crazy things happen to them, where they might meet a sea serpent, or maybe they get their heads cut off and put back on again, like in A Tale Dark and Grim, or they meet a dragon with deadly farts. So that's the kind of like genre that I like to write in, even though I read spy novels and mysteries and all sorts of stuff. But I just tend to like to write things where it's like, oh, you really connect with those kids and suddenly there's a dragon. That's kind of my style.
When you get, oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, please go ahead, Phil.
When you get to your 10th book, is there like a big celebration? Because that seems like an ultimate achievement for me.
It should be, man. It should be. Unfortunately, we couldn't get together to celebrate this one because it came out while we were in quarantine. So I'm going to do a little dance in my room after we hang up because you gave me permission.
All right.
And then the second part of the question was my favorite book, right?
Yeah, your favorite, and yes, that you wrote.
Now I have to ask you a question before I can answer this question. How many kids do you have?
I have 2.
Okay. And do you have a favorite?
On some days?
Right. So a book, I spent years writing these books and I love them like my children. And I have a favorite, but I would never admit it. No, I'm just kidding. I don't have a favorite because I love them all so much. So I don't actually have a favorite, but those were 2 excellent questions from your son.
Oh, thank you. All right, moving on. Let's see. This is a question from Marina. All right. She says she is in 6th grade and wants to be a writer. Do you have any advice for her?
Marina, we are already best friends. That's awesome. So, yes, I do have advice for you. The most important thing that you can do if you want to be a writer is to spend as much time as you possibly can imagining. Playing, writing, drawing, staring out a window, making up stories, taking a walk and just kind of talking to yourself, being on your basketball court and telling yourself stories as you shoot hoops. Imagining takes a million different forms. But the more you imagine, the better you will get at doing creative things like writing, like architecture, like astronomy, mathematics. If you want big muscles, you do push-ups. If you want a creative brain, you imagine, because imagination is like push-ups for your brain. So now, a lot of people these days, we're spending a lot of time in quarantine on screens, television, movies, video games, social, whatever those things are called, social, like, what is it called? You know what I mean? Those are fun, but like a video game is somebody else's imagination that you're playing inside of. I play them too. But you do need to spend as much time as you possibly can turning off the screens and creating and reading, even though that's somebody else's imagination. Your imagination has to do 50% of the work because you have to see it. You have to picture it. Like, it's not done for you. So spend as much time as you can imagining. Now, the other thing that you can do, it was Mariana. Did I get that right?
Yes, I think that's right. That's absolutely.
Okay. So Mariana is write as much as you can and don't worry about whether it's good. You can worry about whether your writing is good when you're an adult and you're trying to pay rent or your mortgage based on your writing career. That's when you need to worry about whether it's good. Right now, what you need to worry about is whether you are having fun while you are writing. Because the more fun you have while you write, the more creative your writing will be, the more writing you will do, and the better you will get at it. So don't stress about spelling or grammar. Don't even worry about whether your story really makes sense in the end. Right now, the most important thing is to have as much fun as you can while you imagine and while you write. Wonderful question. I'm so glad you asked that, Mariana.
That was a great answer. Excellent answer. All right. Well, we got a bunch of this. Is terrific. You did a great job today. All right. This is a question from Lauren. Did you get to visit Cuba for inspiration?
That's a great question. I really, really wanted to go to Cuba, and I was not able to go because it's very difficult to travel to Cuba, as you might know. The governments between the United States and Cuba do not really agree with each other, and so it's hard to get there. Luckily, I wrote with Emma Otegi. She's the co-author of the book, and not only is her family from Cuba, but she's been to Cuba a lot of times. So Emma sort of served as the expert in Cuba, and I served as the expert in the Unicorn Rescue Society. We want to make sure that every book, even though they're co-written by different authors, feels very much like the same series. The characters always feel the same, the pattern, the humor, the pacing feels the same. I should also say that you can read these books in any order. It's not like a story like Harry Potter that builds. It's every book is its own story. So feel free to get the fifth one first, and if you like it, go back and get the first one or the third one or the fourth one, kind of whichever creature you think is coolest. So Emma, and also Emma's big sister, Raquel, is actually a close friend of mine. And Raquel gave us one of the chapters for this book. She didn't write it, but she had an amazing experience with a blind librarian in a Cuban library. He was a librarian who is literally blind and remembers where the books are and what's in the books. So we had to have the blind librarian in Havana in that book.
Wow.
Cool, right?
Incredible.
Yeah.
All right. This is a question from W. Boulay. Do you still teach school?
I don't teach school anymore. I taught for 8 years, and then I left my teaching. So I taught for a couple of years, left for a year to write that book I told you about, the Ancient Egypt book, and then I came back and taught for another 5 or 6 years. But then I now write full time, which means I write for a couple of hours a day, and then I spend the rest of the day lying on the couch staring at the ceiling, just making stuff up, imagining things.
That's good. That's how you
get good job. I recommend it, everybody. If you can find a way to become a writer, I recommend
it. Get those creative juices flowing.
That's right.
This is a question from Gessie. How did you find your co-authors? Oh, that's a good question. I had that one.
Yeah, wonderful question. So these are all authors that I really admired. So Emma wrote this book with me. The book before that about chupacabras is written by an incredible author named David Bowles. David Bowles lives right on the border between Texas and Mexico. He's Mexican-American himself. He wrote an incredible book called They Call Me Guero, A Border Kid's Poems, which won like half the awards last year, if not all of the awards last year. I recommend it. It's super short, great poems about a boy growing up on the border. And so David and we were actually introduced by another children's author, Matt de la Peña. I've spent a lot of time on the border visiting schools in Laredo, Texas. And so I wanted to write about the border, and he was like, man, you got to meet David Bowles. So I called up David and I was like, would you want to write together? And he said, I think so. I was like, what creature would you want to write about? And he was like, the chupacabra. And I was like, oh yeah. So we wrote about the chupacabras together. And then book 3, I co-wrote with an incredible author named Joseph Bruchac. Joe Bruchac is Native American author and storyteller, and he is a legend. And so I heard him tell a story once at a conference, and it was probably the best story I've ever heard tell live. And I was like, oh my God, if I could ever, I want to talk to that guy. And years later, when I wrote the Unicorn Rescue Society, he was the first author that I called up and said, Joe, would you consider writing a book with me? And because he's an amazing person, he said yes. We were once, not everybody knows Joe Bruchac outside of the Native American community, but in the Native American community, you know Joe Bruchac. So we were on tour. Where were we? What state were we in? It was Illinois or maybe somewhere further west. And we approached the car. We got out of the airplane. We're on tour. They had hired a car for us, very nice. And the driver's name was, I think, Richard Two Elk. And I was like, hey, Joe, that sounds like a Native American name. And he's like, yeah. He's like, it's not Irish. So we're coming, and Richard Two Elk says, are you Joe Bruchac? And he was like, yeah. So Joe is like super famous in the Native American community and an incredible writer and storyteller. So he and I wrote the Sasquatch and the Muckleshoot book together.
It's such an interesting way to pair. I mean, you find some individuals that you respect or admire, and then you reach out to them. Do you ever, I mean, has there been any kind of heartbreaks, where you'd reach out to someone you've admired and they're like, I don't have the time, or, I don't do that?
Yes, there have been a couple of people who I desperately wanted to write books with who did not have the time at the time to do it. I still hope that they will write them with me. I will not say their names, but if you're watching right now, you know who I'm talking about. Wonderful authors. But I've been very lucky. I think we had 2 people who didn't have time, and 4 people now who have said yes, including the 6th book, which we have just finished writing, comes out next year. It is called The Secret of the Himalayas. Takes place in Pakistan, in the Himalayas, and is co-written by the incredible author Henna Khan. Henna Khan is a Pakistani American author, Muslim American, who who writes incredible books like Amina's Voice, which many of you may have read, and she's actually from very near Gaithersburg. She lives in Maryland, right near Gaithersburg. So our 6th book we're writing together.
You just said that 6th book is actually complete, or you're more or less.
Yeah, so it takes about a year for us. I try to finish a draft of a book a year before it comes out, and then we're gonna have to edit it a bunch more times. We wrote it, edited it, and now we've sent it to my editor. An editor is somebody who works at a publishing company who's kind of like your teacher. She reads it and she sends me a lot of notes being like, this part is bad, and this part is bad, and I didn't like this part, and this joke isn't funny, and how about you change this part? She doesn't tend to say nice things. She just says the things that need to be changed. And then we go back and we edit it. And she still needs, after we edit it, 6 to 8 months to design it. Because as you saw, it's very specifically laid out with illustrations at the beginning of each chapter, illustrations in. And so all of that design and layout stuff takes a long time. Then they have to print it. They put it in big boxes. They send it to stores. That whole process takes a long time.
Yeah. And that's a great point you make. Thanks for describing what an editor's job is. For the kids, I think it's important to hear that. And they can relate it to their teachers. Sometimes kids, you might think, oh, my teacher's being mean, they grade me hard or judge me, but they're trying to make you better, make you grow. And I'm sure it just helps you tremendously to have that.
It's a great point. And actually, I'll just say this. My dad always edited my stuff starting in middle school. And he would always do the same thing. I would bring him a paper I had written. And he would read it, and then he would call me back, and he would always say, tell me what you were trying to say, which is when I would start to cry. So I'm used to having hard editors, but a hard editor makes you into a really good writer. So if your teacher is critical of your writing, you should thank them after you stop crying.
That's great. Okay, we've got a question here from Isa. She's age 11. She says, is it hard to write a book?
Yes, it is, Isa. First of all, just what I said is hard, right? Like the editing process where they tell you that everything you've done is bad, where you've spent a year or 2 years or 6 years writing something, and then they say it's not good enough. That's very hard. But it's hard way before that. Like I said, my job, I get to lie on the couch for most of the day. But it's not easy to wake up in the morning and not just go straight to the couch, right? I mean, if you didn't have to go to school, you'd probably be tempted to watch TV all day, right? So I have to wake up and there's no one telling me what to do, which is amazing, but also means I have to sit at this computer or sit in front of my little notebooks and write that story. And if I think like, oh, this is hard, I can't stop. I have to keep going. So the self-control that it takes, the drive, you have to really want to be a writer. Okay, I'm going to tell you a secret right now. I don't know how many people are watching this, and I'm a little bit nervous about telling you this, but I'm going to tell it to you. But please do not repeat it anywhere, okay? I know a lot of writers. Some of them are super talented. Some of them, not that talented. Some of them are really smart. Some of them, totally average. What every writer I know has in common, though, is that they're the kind of person who just never gives up. They get stuck and they just keep writing. They send it to their editor and their editor tells them it's terrible and they write it again. They have a book get published and the reviews just are so mean and they write another book anyway. What every single professional author has in common, the only thing is that they're the kind of person who just won't give up. So that's really the hardest part about being a writer, but the most necessary part.
And important for the times right now, I mean, everything's so stick with it, Yep, that's great. So, all right, we got a few more for you here. So let's see. Oh, related to that, how has quarantine and the time of Corona affected your life as a writer?
So, I mean, I kind of covered this a little bit. One of the tough things about being in quarantine is it's really hard to put down the screens, isn't it? You're like on your phone or on your computer or watching TV, and sometimes your computer is school, but then it's a video game, and you're like, and then you can't even go outside half the time, depending on what your neighborhood is like. You know, you may be limited in where you can go. So that's the same thing for authors, and I would say that like I have to use extra willpower to pick up a book because it's so easy to pick up that screen and get like a little bit of stimulation. But when I pick up a book, that's when I start thinking deeply about things. Right now I'm reading a book by Alan Gratz called Project 1065 about a spy in Nazi Germany, a kid who's a spy in Nazi Germany. It's great. And when I pick that up, it gives me so many ideas for books that I want to write. It makes my imagination richer. It's like push-ups for my brain. Whereas when I'm on the screens, not so much. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the hardest things about quarantine. And I would encourage you, young people and adults out there, every time you can think of it, put down the screen, pick up a book, pick up some toys, pick up some Legos, go outside if you can. You'll be happier for it.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope my kids are listening right now. All right, let's see. We've got a question here from, this is a question from Harper and Elizabeth. It says, I host a book club for elementary school students, and we would love to use your books. For people who are in your books, where do you suggest we start? Or I'm sorry, for people who are new to your books, where do you suggest we start?
Figured out. So if you are, it depends on your book group. It depends on the people who are in it, right? So if you have middle elementary school students, second, third, fourth graders, and they like mythical creatures, start with the Unicorn Rescue Society. And you can start with book one, or as I said, you can really start with, you guys could have a vote on like which creature is the coolest and just jump in right there. You won't be confused at all, I promise. So that's Unicorn Rescue Society. If you have readers who are a little older, maybe 5th grade, 6th grade, or who like creepier things, then you can start with the Grimm books, A Tale Dark and Grimm. If you have Star Wars fans, obviously just read the Star Wars book. And if you have readers who are like 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, and who, or, 5th graders who are very strong readers, you can read the Inquisitor's Tale and you will get a medieval epic adventure with a farting dragon. So it really depends. I try to write for a bunch of different kids because I've actually taught all those grades, and I like think about like, what do those kids love? And I put myself in that state when I'm writing those books. So it depends on you.
It's great. It's just great. Okay, we got a question. Okay, from this is M. Cathorp, looks like M. Cathorp. Do you like to read nonfiction, or do you like to read fiction better?
Good question. I mostly read fiction, but I love a good nonfiction book. So I just finished a book that probably is not right for most kids, but it's not inappropriate. It's called Operation Mincemeat. And it's about a spy operation in World War II, and this is true, where they tried to trick the Nazis by dressing up a dead guy in the uniform of a British officer, and they put secret documents in his pockets, but the secret documents were misleading. They were lies. And they dropped them off of the coast of Spain, who was helping out the Nazis at the time, not anymore, obviously. And the Nazis ended up getting the documents and making big mistakes in the war because of the documents on this dead guy. It was super interesting, exciting, weird, creepy. So I like nonfiction as well as fiction. I like a good book. If you tell me a good story, I love it.
It's great. All right. Let's see. From Dahlia. Are you going to write any more books? I know you just said that you're, you finished the most recent book that's coming out in about a year. But is there more in your head, things you're thinking of?
Well, if you are listening carefully, you might have noticed that there's a theme in the books that I've been reading. I don't know if you can take a moment now at home to think about have you noticed a theme in the 2 books that I said that I have been recently reading? How about you, Phil? Have you noticed a theme?
Oh man, I mean, I was hoping there'd be more of a theme with the farting dragons. You know, I can see that there's a lot of things when you talk about fantasy, when you talk about what
It's
how we're
true.
hopping around the different countries and things like that with the characters. But you tell me what
That's
you.
right. You've been listening very well. But in the books that I've been reading specifically, I read a book about a kid spy in Nazi Germany, and then an operation where they dropped a dead body off the coast of Nazi Germany. I would like to write a spy novel that takes place during World War II. And I am preparing for that by reading other books that I respect, that I'm excited about, getting information and details, starting to take notes. This is the very beginning of the writing process. Before I ever write a word down, this is the research phase, but it's like the fun research phase where I'm just reading books I enjoy, learning as much as I can, getting as many ideas as I can, and then starting to develop what that book would look like. So I think I will write this book about a spy in Nazi Germany, but we'll see.
Do you find yourself when you're doing the research, the fun research, as you say, and reading these novels and books? Do you ever reach out to the authors with questions? Like, hey, when you were writing this character, did you do a specific kind of research or anything like that?
Yes. So, Alan, if you're watching, I'm planning on reaching out to you pretty soon to ask you about specifically about what books he used. He has some incredible. So this book again is called Project 1065, and in some incredible details in there. And I'd love to know some of the sources that he used, so I can also get details, but not the same ones that he used. So I will definitely reach out to Alan. I also have a dream of reaching out to the author of Operation Mincemeat, but I haven't worked up the courage. I know Alan personally, but I haven't worked up the courage to write to the author of Operation Mincemeat yet. But in case that guy's watching, Ben, I'll probably write to you one day too.
All right. Well, we've got two more questions here. This one is great, and it's from Anonymous. I really want to know who wrote it. Unicorns, they're pretty hard to find in real life, but if you were going to try to find one, where would you go?
Oh, now you're trying to find out where the unicorns are in the book, aren't you? I'm not going to tell you that. But I will tell you that if you read Unicorn Rescue Society Book 5, Madre, AGUAS of Cuba, in fact, if you read each of these books, 1 through 5, there are these bonus stories at the end called The Secret Order of the Unicorn, about a secret society from the Middle Ages who has hidden the unicorns. And if you read each of those, you can start to piece together the clues. And I will give you one hint. You got to go somewhere where there aren't a lot of people and where it's very easy to hide. And maybe pretty high up. One all I'll say.
Okay. I like that. You can put it on them. Put it on their shoulders. Just give a little bit of advice. All right. This is one that I've been thinking about since the beginning. You said this. So I'm going to ask if you could do this, being that you were the author. Could you please demonstrate for us how to meditate while standing on one foot and throwing laundry? Could you do that?
I would be honored. Are you ready?
Please.
I'm going to do it.
Here
we go. Okay. I don't know if you can see me properly.
All right.
Okay. So first of all, and what I also like to do is I like to try to put a book on my head while I do it.
Wow.
So this is, let's see if you can see me here. Book on the head. And now people are supposed to throw laundry at me, and I'm supposed to knock it away without putting down, and with the book still on my head. Thank you very much.
I mean, there you have it, kids. I mean, that's just walking like you talk it right there. That was great.
Gotta live it.
Adam, you're a super awesome dude. And thank you for taking the time to be with us this morning. We really enjoyed having you, buddy.
Thank you, Phil. I had a great time. Thank you for being such a warm and lovely host. I really appreciate it.
You know what, kids? I want to thank all of you for joining us for VGBF Sunday morning today, our kids show. And I'm tell you what I'm about to do. As soon as I sign off this morning, I'm heading over to Politics and Prose Online to pick up my copy of the Madre de Aguas of Cuba. And guess what? You can do the same thing. Parents, we encourage you to support our partner, independent bookstore, Politics and Prose, where you can easily order your copies of this incredible book online right now. We've got a link in the description box below here. You can just click on it and go get your copy. Okay, please plan to join us again next Sunday morning, same Gaithersburg time, same Gaithersburg place for some drawing fun with the creator of Origami Yoda. What? That is awesome. And also, he's the creator of the new Dee Dodo Future Spy series. I'm talking about none other than Tom Engelberger, my friends. Tom Engelberger will be here next Sunday. In the meantime, parents, take a look around our YouTube channel for lots of engaging content for kids, as well as some really stellar upcoming adult programming. I'm your VGBF host, Phil Kaminsky, signing off and wishing you the most wonderful of Sundays and a joyfully, happily safe Memorial Day. Everybody, I will see you next weekend. Keep